Hello, I'm Larry. I'm a former Navy hospital corpsman, trained as a Fleet Marine Force and Combat Search and Rescue uh, corpsman with over 12 years experience with the Navy. And I also have 25 plus years working for the government as an intelligence officer. Now, currently, I'm the Chief Intelligence Officer for the Collapse Survivor app.
And I'm Drew Miller, CEO of Fortitude Ranch and one of several survival experts that support Collapse Survivor.
This app, it's an edutainment type of app. It's survival education, and it's also entertaining to go through the future experience of a realistic exercise on how to survive a collapse with an unknown threat. These are very real scenarios that are launched in this app. We have a lot of improvements planned, and we would really appreciate users to forward any types of ideas and added improvements that we could put into the app in the future. These apps deal with difficult and unpleasant topics about collapse survival. Drew?
Yeah, the purpose of this app is really to put you in tough simulated decisions, some difficult moral decisions you'll have to make as well. But by doing this exercise, you're going to learn, you're going to get more future experience on what could happen. And this is how we do training in the military. We do command post or tabletop exercises where we get into a war situation, have to pretend we're deploying forces and making decisions. And that gives you great training and future experience.
The purpose of this podcast is to review the collapse threat and the key lessons that were learned on preparedness from the particular scenario and simulation that was in this first episode. So we define a collapse as the economy stops working. There is a widespread, long-lasting loss of law and order, and as a result, usually high numbers of fatalities, sometimes upwards into the millions.
Yeah. Now, in some scenarios, it may not be a very severe level of collapse. You may not have that kind of millions of levels of casualties, but we want to show you a wide variety of them.
That's true. Each week with a new scenario, you won't know what the pending disaster is, but there will be a great deal of uncertainty and conflicting information that you will have to process.
There are a lot of differences between preppers and the masses who refuse to even think about what's going to happen and what they'll do in a collapse. There are a lot more Americans preparing themselves in forms of stockpiling food and water, but there's a big difference between what I call rainy day preppers who have, maybe a week or two of food and modest preparations, and what I call collapse preppers, people who are doing a lot more preparations and are able to survive a really bad collapse like the grid goes down or a bad pandemic like we just had in this first scenario of H5N1. This is kind of just going to give you a quick overview of H5N1. You've been through the scenario, so you know a lot about it, but it used to be called, some people still call it avian or bird flu, but that's not a good name anymore because it is no longer confined to just birds. It's spreading today in dozens of mammal populations, and biologists, experts say it is inevitable. This virus, 60% lethal to humans now, will eventually become human-to-human transmissible, and when that happens, it'll be the worst disaster that mankind has experienced.
Now, that's an article that you wrote, correct, Dr. Miller?
Yes, that's correct. It's an article I wrote about bioengineering. The problem is that there's technology out there, CRISPR, and even low-tech methods through gain-of-function research that's actually been published. So you can actually make an H5N1 virus mammal-to-mammal transmissible and human-to-human transmissible. Again, biologists have been warning us for years that H5N1 is either going to naturally mutate to become human-human transmissible, or it's going to be deliberately manipulated by bad guys, terrorists, a nation state. And when that happens, again, it's going to be the biggest disaster we've ever experienced. The estimate is that 1 billion people could die from this.
Mm-hmm. So here's a real threat alert on H5N1. So if there is a real collapse threat warning issued from the Fortitude Ranch Threat Watch and Member Warning System, what you'll receive is an alert like this one on your phone. Think about this. The extra hours, even days warning that you get of a real developing disaster could save your life. Now, if you do not wish to get these notices of the weekly simulation alerts, you can turn those off in the app. But the real alerts, those will be pushed to your phone. Dr.
A
Miller?
lot of people have been, aghast that our government is, gave money to Wuhan for them to do viral research. A recent report just out that Canadian researchers also have given viruses and worked illegally with the Chinese government at Wuhan. And the other thing is what's described here on this slide. U.S. government-funded gain-of-function research on the H5N1 virus did succeed in making it mammal-to-mammal transmissible through the air in the ferret population. But worse was they published how they did this in an open press journal. So the word is out there. So the reason we started off with this H5N1 scenario is this is going to happen. We are going to have to deal with a pandemic like this at some point.
That's incredible. Why in the world would they even want to publish something like that?
The rationale is that the knowledge of how to do this is so widespread that the bad guys already know this. So the reason they're doing gain-of-function research, they argue, is that we need to prepare these viruses, ones that are human-to-human transmissible, so we can develop vaccines for them. But there's a pretty growing consensus that this has been a big mistake. We should not be doing gain-of-function research. And there's been U.S. commissions, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, and they've put out warnings that we have to be prepared for a terrorist or a nation-state attack with bioweapons, like a human-to-human contagious H5N1. And we're not getting prepared, but the warnings have been made that we need to do that. And again, the 1918-1919 Spanish flu, less than 2% lethal. Avian flu is currently 60% lethal. So when this happens, it's going to be a disaster.
There are many different groups doing this type of research too. The Russians, Iran with the Revolutionary Guard forces, Chinese.
Yeah, and when this happens, this is going to we have a scale here of minor peacetime. We call that level 1 up to level 5, which is a total collapse. H5N1 will be a total collapse. No one's going to go to work. Nothing's going to get produced. People are going to starve to death, and that's what happened in this scenario. So this was a level 5 collapse. And it's kind of funny, Larry, you guys used this Postman level in your rating scale. That was easily my favorite, collapse disaster movie. I really thought that was kind of funny.
Oh, it was a good one, definitely. So what about elected officials?
Unfortunately, I shouldn't say, well, I will say unfortunately. So elected officials are going to survive a pandemic, any kind of bad collapse, because the top ones will be sheltered in Mount Weather in Virginia. There's also Site R, Raven Rock in Pennsylvania. Lots of government facilities, FEMA, military, to protect top elected officials, but basically nothing that's being done for us.
Whatever disaster triggers or causes a collapse, in this case, it's a pandemic, but in almost every simulation we run, all the disasters, what you're going to see is there'll be looters and bad people taking advantage of the disaster, basically to loot and maraud and cause chaos and mayhem all around the areas that they're able to operate in. So when we talk about marauding, we define that as breaking into homes, stealing food, even killing if they have to get the food and supplies that they need.
Yeah, you can't expect people to stay at home and slowly starve to death over a month. They're going to go out and steal food. They're going to maraud to try to get it. And in the course of that, a lot of people will be killing to try to stay alive.
Well, that's what we've seen in past government exercises with pandemics, and there's been several of them. They all end up with the problem that we simply don't have the ability, the government doesn't have the ability to feed people, distribute the food, and provide some type of relief and security in the event of a pandemic. So let's quickly review some of the tough decisions that you're going to make in this scenario and what was generally one thing that you should do or not do. Perhaps the most important question you have when there is a collapse is, bugging out. When do I do that?
Yeah. Well, the earlier you bug out, obviously, the better. And if you're in a big city or even a big suburb trying to survive at home in a bad collapse where there's going to be a lot of marauders, a lot of people starving to death, is generally not a good move. So you want to get onto the road if you've got a safer rural place to get to or a survival community like Forty Ranch as soon as you possibly can.
And there was actually a question in this first scenario on that very subject. And there was one concern about potential roadblocks going up because of the pandemic.
Yeah, well, people, I think, really, a lot of preppers really overestimate the likelihood of roadblocks, and especially the time it takes for them to establish. It's going to take you a long time. First of all, the elected officials have to make the decision, hey, we're going to block off our roads. Then they can't do it with police. You got to mobilize the Army Guard to do that. That takes you another 24 hours. And then they've got to get organized and equipped to do it. And it's really not feasible to do it. There's just too many roads to go. So it's going to take days to get roads blocked, even in a pandemic. So you are going to have time to bug out.
Which basically means you can get around roadblocks, correct?
Yeah, so even if you waited longer and they did get roadblocks up, you're going to be able to get around them. And more importantly, the odds that a small town would try to block their roads is pretty low, because if a small town that says, hey, we're going to block our roads to keep people out, all they're going to do is make people trying to escape, trying to get through their town on that road mad. They're going to shoot at you. You're going to end up with a lot more trouble. Or worse, if you do successfully stop them, now what have you done? Now they can't get their cars through, so now they get out on foot and they're coming into your town to maraud. So the roadblock threat and people blockading roads, I think, is just grossly exaggerated.
So what about a quick dash to the grocery store at the beginning of a collapse?
And generally, it's always a bad decision, but it's an especially bad one in a pandemic, because everyone's going to want to, not everyone, but non-preppers who haven't thought things through, haven't played an app like Collapse Survivor, they are going to try to go get food because they're not prepared. And the problem is there's going to be so many people there. There's going to be looting, stealing. Some of the killing may start very early on with people trying to get food. And in a pandemic situation, you could catch the virus. And that's what happened in this scenario. A lot of people did get killed trying to go to the grocery store, or they caught the virus and died later from the virus.
That's very true. We did see some players that tried to do that. And not only were some of them killed by the marauders, they caught the virus and died in that scenario. So you have a decision to make. Let's say you're going to go into your neighbor's house to take food because it looks like they're gone. When you think about that, in the scenario, in this collapse survivor scenario, there's a random number generator to simulate your luck and some probabilistic outcomes in those very situations. People decide, do I go into my neighbor's house to try and find something because I don't have anything? Or do I just sit tight, stay quiet in my own house, and I run out of food and other supplies that I need?
So depending on your luck of the draw, your random number generator, you could go in your neighbor's house and they're gone. You got food. Some people went in their neighbor's house, found out neighbors were hiding there, and they got shot. And there was also randomness from the random number generator in the begging lady decision. In most cases, it was a begging lady. For some probabilistic random number generator outcome, the begging lady was actually a diversion. There's a marauder force breaking in on the other side of your place while they were doing that. So there is an element of luck. It's not just your skills and preparations in these scenarios. Luck does play a role in these scenarios in your survival, just as it does in real life.
So let's get into the calculations that are going on in this app, basically the programming. And you had to enter certain information about yourself, your group, your skills, your food, your water, your ammo supplies. These are all used in a scenario to track if you're running out of food, out of water, ammo, and other important supplies, which also impact your odds on surviving things like a gunfight with a marauder group. So I want to stress that we're working on improvements in the app, but it's basically, we're trying to make it more realistic and more accurate so that we can estimate survival rates. Now, again, this is our first 6-day simulation. So if you've got any kind of added wisdom or complaints about the app, we'd appreciate if you'd email us your ideas or potential fix to the problem rather than just rating the app bad. We'd really appreciate you getting online. There's a link for you to do that where we'll take your suggestions and really put a serious look and focus on how that might help the app be more realistic and accurate.
Yeah, you can email them to contact@collapsesurvivor.com. And you're welcome to submit also ideas on new threats to cover and scenarios. Any suggestions, ideas you've got on preparedness methods and techniques, great equipment, etc., please email them to us. We want Collapse Survivor to be useful for the entire prepper community, so we welcome your suggestions and your ideas.
Now, something you're going to see that was calculated out with this scenario will be survival rates for the H5N1 scenario that was just finished. The app tracks if you died, if you survived, it records what caused your death, if that's what happened, and where you were when that happened, and other things that are part of the scenario.
Yeah, so these are the rates for this scenario, and it's very interesting. As you can see, people who die from the virus is actually quite low because with a 60% lethal virus, people are going to stay away. They're going to go home and really stay home. It's not going to be like COVID-19 where people said this, don't need to worry about this. So the virus actually did not kill very many people in this scenario. It did in big city at 4%. Elsewhere, it was little to none. Dehydration was a little bit of a thing in a grid down scenario. You're going to see lots of dehydration casualties because in a grid down, water systems down, no water, people will die from that. You can't go 3 days without water. Starvation was a big killer here. It could have been worse, but up to 11% of people in big cities, in other places a lot lower. No medical care killed some people. The biggest one in this scenario was marauder deaths. And again, especially in the big cities and the suburbs, there were some suicides. You had the option in there, they had a mental health question. If you wanted to, you commit suicide. And that's realistic. I think in a really bad collapse, a lot of people facing starvation, worried about their, what is my family, what's left of it. A lot of them will commit suicide. So the overall fatality rate was as bad as 47% in big cities, down to 2% in a survival community like Fortitude Ranch.
So you will be emailed a short PDF report on the lessons learned from the simulation. Those usually come the next day. And as Dr. Miller just discussed, some of these results and their implications for this first scenario.
Yeah, the one we'll have in that lessons learned report that preppers know about, but a lot of people don't, is that government officials are not speaking frankly to people about the threats. They try to keep everyone assured that, there's nothing to worry about, stay calm, government will take care of you. And they certainly don't promote guns and ammo, but I can tell you that if you don't have weapons when people are starving to death and marauders are out, having a lot of food supply isn't going to help you. It might even hurt you because you've made yourself a tempting target. You have to be able to defend yourself and your preparations or you won't make it through a collapse.
So, and there's, as you look at some of the results in it, you can also see your odds of survival can be pretty horrible if you're in a city or suburb. Definitely much better if you're in a rural area. But the very notion that millions of Americans have that they're going to go out into the forest and survive by hunting deer and building log shelters is really ridiculous. So another thing to follow up with that, tens of millions of people are trying to survive in the wilderness. So let's think about this. Suddenly you have millions of people in the wilderness areas, which means game, it's going to be gone very, very quickly. And probably the people that do get the game will be the marauder groups because they're already out there with the weapons and hunting. Whereas other people, they're just trying to find something that's easy for them to get to be able to put into their supplies.
Okay.
So in most scenarios, we're going to do a deep dive with a preparedness education discussion. And what I've asked Dr. Miller to talk about, keeping people separated and the idea of not only being separated, but quarantine in a collapse such as this with the H5N1.
Thank you, Larry. So Forted Ranch really was designed with pandemics in mind. So we've got a lot of buildings. We try to keep our people spread out. And we've got rooms with exterior windows, or if they're underground, a lot of them will have private air vents running up to the surface. You can see a photo of that in the picture there. But the big thing is you got to control people when they arrive to your place, because you have to assume anyone coming in has the virus, their group has it. So you have to keep them separated. And for later arrivals, if you can't put them in their room because there's someone too close to them, you're going to have to put them in a quarantine tent or something like that. The nice thing about this, however, is you really only have to do this for a week or two. Most viruses, even if you're not showing symptoms within a day or two, you will show symptoms, but you could assume the worst, that there's a latency period of up to a week where you have the virus, but you're not showing the symptoms yet. So you could keep people quarantined, separated for a week. If they don't have the virus, now they can interact. You don't have to worry about keeping them separated. So at Fortune Ranch, our process is to keep people separated for a week or two. If a member comes in really late, they're not going to come in. They'll actually be in a quarantine tent outside the compound. Once they're there, we're feeding them, protecting them. If they're there for a week and don't get the virus, then we know they're okay now to come inside. So the good thing about that pandemic is the virus threat for a place where you can keep yourself away from people, it's gone in a week. You don't have the virus, you're okay, as long as you keep other people away from you for the duration of the virus.
So we don't want these lessons learned podcasts to be all death and destruction, gloom and doom. So we plan at the end of every one of these episodes to bring on a bit of prepper humor for you. Like, you're a prepper when your buddy wants to flee the city before the collapse, but you're a doomsday prepper who's been waiting for this to happen for years. And the commander, he wants to stay because you're about to win. Everyone remembers that classic scene from the Star Wars movie.
Mm-hmm. So our source for that was facebook.com survival humor. And I've got my own favorite poster coming up here on this next slide, and I'm just going to read it for you. You see the falling star there, and the caption is, "When you wish upon a falling star, your dreams can come true, unless it's really a meteor hurtling towards the earth, which will destroy all life. Then you're pretty much toast no matter what you wish for, unless it's death by meteorite." And believe it or not, I'm pretty darn sure that at some point during the year, you're probably going to see an asteroid strike scenario, disaster scenario, because that's what's happened in our history. We've had several asteroid strikes that have wiped out most life on Earth.
So what's the difference between a meteor and an asteroid?
So a meteor is a small piece of an asteroid or a comet, and we think it takes about a 6-mile diameter asteroid that'll have to be that big to destroy most life on Earth.
Okay, well, sometimes, prepper humor can also be very educational and teach a valuable lesson for you about survival. So here's a good example of educational prepper humor, and we want to help you out with this. So Drew's gonna work with some puppets in a realistic manner, and we'll just step through how you can take care of yourself if you're attacked by a bear. So in a survival situation, it's not out of the extraordinary to think that you might run into a bear and you may not have a weapon, or you can't use a weapon because you don't want to make noise because there are marauder groups nearby in the area. So you've been confronted by a bear. What you have to do in step 1, you want to wait for the bear to make a move. Now in step 2, when it does attack, you want to duck underneath the bear and shoot inside under its short front arms. Step 3, you get on its back. Now, once you're on the back of that bear, it won't be able to reach you because it has short front arms. Now you go for that bare naked chokehold. And this is an important part here with step 6. When the bear finally passes out and it will fall forward, you did it. Success. So, we had success, but now let's look at step 7. Now that you've stepped out of your fantasy and realized you died somewhere around step 2, where do we go from there?
Yeah. Actually, step 2 is the dying when you duck in. I actually think you can get further than that because the bear knows that when it gets up big like this, that's the signal you better run or he's going to kill you. So he's expecting, stupid man here to run. But when the man rushes in, he's going to surprise the bear. And, his mother may have taught him when he was a cub, hey, don't eat the stupid one. So he's going to hesitate. It's kind of like a low-tech shock and awe. So you might actually get up on the back of the bear. I think you might get to step 3 or even step 4 where you're trying to do the chokehold. But, but ultimately, I think you're right. Bear's going to get you down and it's pretty much over. It's going to start eating you.
Yeah, and he'll probably eat your liver first.
Oh, I think you're exactly right, Larry. The liver has iron and all kinds of vitamins. Very, very nutritious food. It is the most nutritious part of the whole body. So yeah, bear's going to chomp down on your liver there first.
There's a really valuable survival lesson for you in that scenario there, which basically when you're cleaning out game in a survival situation, you don't want to throw out the heart, the liver, and the other organs like that. You need to eat them. Pound for pound, they're the most valuable part of flesh you could probably have in the game that you do collect.
And very tasty, too.
Good point. Bears have been eating dead humans for a while. But when you look at this series of steps there and confronting the bear, at the end of the day, it all comes down to one really important thing to remember. Don't be stupid.
So yeah, read directions on stuff. You should have read that step 7 before you got into doing the bear hold thing. And then, you can't afford an injury and a collapse, can you, Larry?
No, because there are no hospitals. Any injuries that you may have, they could become fatal.
So if you thought our humor was kind of lame, and it was, all you got to do is send in better prepper humor jokes, and we'll put them on our show and credit you. So again, send them to contact@collapsesurvivor.com. We'd prefer airing your better humor, prepper humor, than ours.
Yeah, we'll definitely take any improvements on the prepper humor and suggestions. Now, this scenario, it played out live over 6 days. It will go into our apps scenario library. So again, you can play at any time with no pauses, and you can flip through the screens as fast as you like. Expect there are going to be even more lessons learned as you go through it again. And in that first time, you will be emailed a report so that you can see some of the statistics, and which might help you to actually learn more survival lessons and how to prepare yourself for future scenarios. So we hope to see you next week for another new scenario of survival preparedness lessons. And until then, strength and honor.
Prepare for the worst, enjoy the present.